Judge Frank Caprio was not just an ordinary judge. He was a man who carried kindness in his heart and showed it to everyone who entered his courtroom. For many years, he sat on the bench in Providence, Rhode Island. But his work reached far beyond the walls of his small courtroom. People from around the world would watch short clips of his cases, and what they saw touched their hearts deeply. In those videos, Judge Caprio listened carefully to every person, and instead of only focusing on rules and punishments, he often looked for the human story behind each case. When a single mother came to his court, nervous and worried about paying a fine, Judge Caprio did not only see her as a defendant. He saw her as a person struggling to raise children and do her best. Sometimes he would reduce fines. Sometimes he would forgive them completely. And other times he would give people more time to pay. His goal was not to break people down, but to lift them up. People called him the kindest judge in the world, and that title spread across social media. Viewers around the world began to follow his courtroom clips. They laughed when he shared a gentle joke. They cried when they saw him forgive someone who had no money but a heavy burden. It was not about legal drama, but about humanity. Judge Caprio showed that even in a place where people often felt scared and judged, there could still be hope. This kindness did not come from nowhere. Judge Caprio grew up in a working-class family. He understood struggle. He knew what it was like when money was tight. He never forgot his roots, and that made him connect with people who stood before him. It was as if he looked at them and said silently, "I understand you. I will not crush you with the weight of the law. I will treat you like a human being." Stories of his compassion became famous. One time, a young boy came into his courtroom with his father. The boy was shy, but Judge Caprio asked him to help decide the fine. Instead of treating it like a serious punishment, he turned it into a warm and funny moment. The boy laughed. The father smiled with relief, and everyone watching felt that something beautiful had happened. It showed how even in serious places, kindness could create joy. Another time, an elderly man came before him. The man explained that he was struggling to care for his sick wife and did not have enough money to pay a ticket. Judge Caprio listened carefully. He asked gentle questions and gave the man a chance to explain. When the man spoke, tears filled his eyes. Judge Caprio softly forgave the fine and told him to focus on taking care of his wife. That video went viral because people everywhere could feel the sincerity in the judge's heart. The world became hungry for these moments. In a time when news was often filled with negativity, Judge Caprio's courtroom felt like a light. His videos gave people faith that kindness still existed. For some, watching his judgments became part of their daily routine. They said it helped them feel calm, hopeful, and even inspired to be kinder in their own lives. Even celebrities and public figures began noticing him. They admired the way he balanced justice with mercy. They saw how he used his authority not to scare people, but to guide them. He had the power to punish harshly, yet he often chose compassion. That choice made him not weaker but stronger in the eyes of millions. Judge Caprio himself never sought fame. He often said he was just doing his duty as a judge. He believed that every person had a story, and it was his job to listen. He reminded people that behind every fine, every ticket, every violation, there was a human being with struggles, hopes, and dreams. His philosophy was simple yet powerful. Justice without compassion is incomplete. For many, Judge Caprio represented the kind of leadership the world needed more of. He showed that authority and kindness could exist together. He reminded everyone that rules matter, but people matter more. He carried himself with warmth, a gentle smile, and the wisdom of someone who lived through many years of experience. His courtroom was not just a place for judgments. It was a stage where humanity was displayed in its truest form. Sometimes it was funny, sometimes heartbreaking, but always real. Judge Caprio made people believe that the law could be fair without being cruel. His compassion became a lesson not just for lawyers or judges, but for ordinary people everywhere. This was the man who would soon receive a farewell on live television. The man whose kindness touched the life of Keanu Reeves and millions of others. Before the farewell, the world had already seen who Judge Frank Caprio was. A man who carried justice in one hand and kindness in the other. A judge who became a symbol of hope. Keanu Reeves was one of the most famous actors in the world. But what made him truly loved was not just his movies. It was his personality. He was known everywhere as a humble man, quiet, gentle, and respectful. Even though he was a Hollywood superstar, People admired him because he never acted proud or arrogant. Instead, he lived a simple life, traveling on subways, talking kindly with strangers, and helping people without wanting attention. He had lived through pain and loss in his own life, but those experiences made him more compassionate toward others. When Keanu first discovered Judge Frank Caprio, it was not through fancy news or media. It was through short videos that appeared online. Like millions of people, he clicked one, curious about what made this judge so special. What he saw touched his heart immediately in those clips. Keanu watched how Judge Caprio treated people not as criminals or lawbreakers, but as humans. A person would walk into the courtroom nervous, expecting to be punished, but Judge Caprio would listen carefully. Often with a smile, he would sometimes laugh with them, sometimes comfort them, and sometimes forgive them. Keanu felt a connection because he himself believed in kindness. In his career, he had seen both the good and bad sides of fame. He knew how cold the world could be. He had faced loneliness, he had faced tragedy, but he always tried to stay gentle. Watching Judge Caprio gave him hope that people in powerful positions could still choose compassion. Over time, Keanu watched more clips. Sometimes it was late at night after a long day on set. Sometimes it was while traveling. Each time he felt calm, the judge's words, simple and honest, carried weight. They reminded him that no matter how big or small a person's life seemed, everyone deserved respect. He remembered one video clearly. An old man explained to Judge Caprio that he could not pay a fine because he was caring for his sick wife. Keanu felt tears in his eyes as he listened. The judge forgave the fine and told the man to focus on love and family. That moment stayed in Keanu's heart. It was more powerful than any film scene. It was real-life kindness. As months passed, Keanu began to speak about Judge Caprio to his friends and colleagues. He told them how inspiring the judge was. Some laughed and said, "You watch court videos in your free time?" But Keanu only smiled. He explained that these videos were not about tickets or fines. They were about humanity. He said that Judge Caprio reminded him of what really mattered in life: compassion, respect, and humility. When news spread that Judge Caprio was retiring because of health issues, Keanu felt sadness. He knew that the world was losing a voice of kindness from the courtroom. He also felt grateful because before retirement, millions, including himself, had learned something important from the judge. It was not just about law. It was about how to treat people. The producers of a talk show wanted to honor Judge Caprio. They planned a farewell where people could celebrate his career. Behind the scenes, they thought about who could truly reflect the same values of humility and kindness. Keanu Reeves was the perfect choice. He was not only a famous actor, but also someone who understood the judge's message deeply. When the idea came to invite Keanu, it felt right. At first, Keanu was quiet about it. He did not like surprises or dramatic shows of attention, but this time it was different. It was about giving respect to a man who had inspired him. He agreed to join, not to shine a spotlight on himself, but to stand beside Judge Caprio and say thank you. The plan was kept secret from the judge. He was told he would be honored on the show, but he had no idea Keanu Reeves would appear. Producers knew it would be a powerful meeting. Two men from very different worlds, one from Hollywood and one from the courtroom, yet both carrying the same message of kindness. Keanu prepared carefully. He thought about what he wanted to say. He did not want empty compliments. He wanted to speak honestly. He remembered all the moments he watched those videos when he felt tired, broken, or lost. He remembered how Judge Caprio's words gave him peace. He knew he had to tell the judge that his compassion reached farther than he could imagine. For Keanu, it was not just meeting a famous judge. It was about honoring a man whose actions had quietly touched his soul. In a world full of noise, cruelty, and speed, both men had shown a different path, one with patience, gentleness, and kindness. Keanu believed that such people were rare, and when life gave a chance to thank them, you should never miss it. So as the show date came closer, excitement grew. The audience would not only see a farewell, but a meeting of two men who had never spoken before yet carried the same spirit. The Hollywood star who had inspired millions on screen was about to honor the judge who had inspired millions in real life. It was a story waiting to be told, and it promised to be unforgettable. The day of the farewell show was coming closer. Judge Frank Caprio had been invited as a special guest. He thought it would be a normal interview about his retirement, a chance to share a few memories and say goodbye to the audience who admired him. For him, it was already an honor. He had never seen himself as a celebrity. He believed he was just a judge doing his duty with compassion. But the producers of the show wanted to make it much more than a simple farewell. They wanted to create a moment that the world would remember. Behind the scenes, a secret plan was being put together. The producers contacted Keanu Reeves. They explained the idea of surprising Judge Caprio on live television. They told Keanu that his presence would not only honor the judge but also show the connection between two men who had touched the world in different ways. Keanu thought about it for a moment and then quietly agreed. He knew it would be a beautiful gesture, something genuine. The producers kept everything very secret. They wanted Judge Caprio to feel true surprise. They knew that if he found out in advance, he would try to downplay it or even refuse too much attention. That was his nature. He was humble and never wanted the spotlight only on him, so they told him only that he would appear on a farewell episode, where people would celebrate his years of service. Nothing more, the stage was designed to look warm and welcoming. Large screens displayed clips from his courtroom, showing moments where he forgave fines, comforted families, or made children laugh. The audience was carefully chosen. People who admired the judge, families who had been touched by his kindness, and regular viewers who followed him online. The energy in the room was full of respect and love. Judge Caprio arrived at the studio on the evening of the show. He wore his usual gentle smile, shaking hands with people backstage. He felt nervous not because of the cameras, but because he was about to close an important chapter of his life. For decades, he had sat in the courtroom chair, listening to stories and giving out judgments filled with compassion. Now it was ending, and he was not sure how to feel. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves entered through a separate entrance. Away from the judge's eyes, he kept his appearance quiet. He did not want to make it about himself. He simply waited backstage, preparing his thoughts. He knew that soon he would walk out and stand beside a man he had admired from afar for years. As the lights dimmed, the host of the show welcomed Judge Caprio onto the stage. The audience clapped loudly, many standing up to show their respect. The judge looked touched but also a little overwhelmed. He sat down in his chair and began to talk about his journey. He shared small stories, how he first became a judge, how his family taught him to value kindness, how he never expected the world to notice his courtroom. The audience listened carefully, some wiping away tears. He thought this was all there was to the evening. He believed the show would simply end with kind words and applause. But behind the curtains, Keanu Reeves waited for his cue. The producers whispered to him, "Get ready. It's almost time." The actor nodded, his heart beating a little faster. He knew that when he stepped out, it would be a moment Judge Caprio never forgot. The host smiled and said to Judge Caprio, "Tonight, we have someone very special who wanted to say goodbye to you personally." Judge Caprio looked slightly confused. He turned his head, wondering who it could be. Maybe a family member, maybe someone from his city. Then suddenly the curtains opened, and out walked Keanu Reeves. The audience erupted into cheers and applause. Some gasped, some shouted in excitement. Cameras flashed. Judge Caprio's face froze in pure surprise. He blinked twice as if he could not believe what he was seeing. For a moment he simply sat still, trying to process the fact that one of the most famous actors in the world was walking towards him with a warm smile. Keanu extended his hand and Judge Caprio stood up slowly. Still shocked, the two men shook hands, and then Keanu gently pulled him into an embrace. The audience clapped louder, the sound filling the studio. It was a meeting between two men from very different worlds, yet their values connected them deeply. Judge Caprio finally managed to speak, his voice soft and touched. "I never expected this," he said. The audience laughed kindly at his honesty. Keanu smiled and replied, "I couldn't let you leave without saying thank you." It was the beginning of a moment that everyone in the room knew would be remembered forever. What made it powerful was not just the presence of a Hollywood star. It was the meaning behind it. Keanu Reeves had come not as a celebrity promoting a film, but as a human being honoring another human being. Judge Caprio had no idea this was planned, and that genuine surprise made the moment real. It was not scripted drama, it was life. As they both sat down, the cameras zoomed in on Judge Caprio's face. His eyes were wet, his smile humble. He had always given kindness to others, and now kindness was being returned to him in the most unexpected way. The atmosphere in the studio was electric but tender. People felt like they were witnessing history. It was more than television. It was a moment of pure humanity. a connection between kindness and gratitude. The surprise had worked perfectly, and the story of that night was only just beginning. Judge Frank Caprio sat in his chair on the brightly lit stage, still believing this was just another interview about his career. The audience had already made him feel honored, and he thought the evening would be filled with stories, laughter, and maybe some tears. But then, at that unexpected moment, Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage. The entire room erupted into claps, cheers, and even whistles. The energy was so strong that the walls seemed to vibrate with it. Judge Caprio froze in his seat, his eyes widened, and his mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just seen an old friend after many years. Only this time it was someone he had never actually met. For a few seconds, the world seemed to slow down. The cameras zoomed in on his face, capturing the look of pure shock and wonder. Keanu walked forward with his calm, humble smile. He moved slowly, not in a dramatic Hollywood way, but in a gentle manner that showed respect. The audience stood up, clapping louder and louder. Judge Caprio placed his hand on his chest, almost as if asking himself, "Is this real?" Then he stood up slowly and Keanu extended his hand. When their hands touched, the crowd cheered even louder. But Keanu did not just shake his hand. He pulled Judge Caprio into a warm embrace. The audience went silent for a brief moment, almost holding its breath, because they knew they were witnessing something rare. Two men of kindness meeting for the very first time. It was not the embrace of a celebrity and a public figure. It was the embrace of two souls who respected each other. Judge Caprio's eyes began to water. He had spent his life giving compassion to others. But in that moment he felt the compassion being returned. He whispered something softly to Keanu, words that the microphone barely caught. "I can't believe you're here." Keanu nodded and smiled. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. His voice was low, full of sincerity. The host of the show looked at the scene with a smile, stepping back to let the moment breathe. The audience, still standing, continued to clap, but their energy changed. It was not wild excitement anymore. It was respect. They knew they were watching a meeting that was not staged for fame, but created out of true admiration. Judge Caprio finally sat back down, but his hands were still trembling slightly. He laughed nervously and said to the audience, "I never expected this. I thought I was just here to say goodbye." The crowd laughed warmly with him. His honesty made the moment even more touching. Keanu sat beside him, leaning slightly closer as if to show he was not there as a guest of honor, but as a companion. The judge kept looking at Keanu, shaking his head in disbelief. He had seen countless faces in his courtroom, people from every walk of life. But seeing Keanu Reeves sitting next to him felt unreal. The actor was known by billions, yet here he was, giving his time to honor a humble judge. That truth touched him deeply. Keanu's presence was not loud or demanding. He sat quietly, letting Judge Caprio feel the surprise. Every movement he made, every smile showed humility. He clapped when the audience clapped. He looked at the judge when the judge spoke. He gave all the attention to him. It was clear Keanu did not come to steal the spotlight, but to share it. The cameras caught the expressions of the audience. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others had wide smiles. It was as if they had all been invited into a family moment. Everyone could feel the emotional weight of the encounter. It was not about fame or power. It was about respect and kindness. Judge Caprio finally found his voice more clearly. He looked at Keanu and said, "You are one of the kindest souls I have ever known, even from far away. I've admired your humility." The audience clapped again. Keanu shook his head slightly and answered, "That means more coming from you. You've shown the world that compassion can live in every corner." Even in a courtroom, their conversation flowed naturally. Like two old friends catching up, the audience remained silent, almost afraid to break the magic of the moment. Each word spoken felt heavy with meaning. Every smile exchanged felt like a message of hope. At that point, Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to relax a little. He was still overwhelmed, but he also felt joy. He said to the host, "You really surprised me tonight." The host chuckled and replied, "That was the plan, Judge." Everyone laughed softly. Breaking the tension and filling the studio with warmth, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to Judge Caprio, saying, "I wrote something for you. I didn't want to come empty-handed." The judge looked at the paper, unfolding it slowly. It was a handwritten note. Simple but powerful, it said, "Thank you for teaching the world that justice and kindness can walk hand in hand." The judge held the note close to his chest. His eyes were moist again. He whispered, "This is one of the greatest honors of my life." The audience clapped, and Keanu smiled gently. In that instant, it felt like time stopped. Two men sat side by side, no longer judge and actor, but two human beings bound by compassion. The unexpected meeting became the heart of the show. Everyone knew they would never forget what they had witnessed. A humble judge surprised by a humble actor. A moment where admiration turned into connection. And for Judge Caprio, that night became proof that the kindness he had given to the world had found its way back to him in the most beautiful and surprising way. The studio was quiet after the surprise. The audience had seen Judge Frank Caprio's honest reaction, and now they waited for what Keanu Reeves would say. Keanu leaned forward in his chair, his voice gentle but clear. He looked at the judge with respect and said, "I came here tonight because I wanted to tell you something that I've carried for years." The crowd leaned closer, eager to hear. Keanu spoke slowly as if he wanted every word to matter. He told Judge Caprio that he was one of the millions of people who had watched his courtroom videos. He said he first found them late at night, scrolling online after a long day. At first, he thought it was just another court show, but soon he realized it was something completely different. "When I watched you," Keanu said, "I didn't just see a judge. I saw a teacher of kindness." The audience clapped softly, and Judge Caprio smiled humbly, shaking his head, but Keanu continued. He said there were times in his own life when he felt tired, when the world seemed cold and unfair. In those moments, he would watch Judge Caprio forgive someone, or laugh with a nervous young child in the courtroom, or listen carefully to an old man who had no money. "Those moments gave me hope again," Keanu explained. "You reminded me that compassion is still alive." Judge Caprio's eyes glistened with emotion. He placed his hand on his heart and whispered, "Thank you. That means the world." But Keanu wasn't finished. He leaned closer and said, "I want you to know something important. Your kindness didn't just touch the people in your courtroom. It reached people across oceans, across languages, across generations, people like me, people who needed to see that justice can have a heart." The audience broke into applause again. Some even stood to cheer. Keanu looked out at them for a moment, then back to the judge. He said, "I've played many roles in my career, heroes, fighters, men who try to save the world. But you, Judge Caprio, you're the real hero. You showed us that saving one person with kindness can be greater than any action scene, greater than any movie, because it's real." The judge lowered his eyes for a moment. Clearly overwhelmed, he had never thought of himself that way. For him, he was just doing his job. He always believed the law should protect people, not destroy them. To hear someone like Keanu Reeves, admired around the world, call him a hero was almost too much for him to take in. Keanu went on. He told a story about one particular video that stayed with him. It was about the elderly man who came into the courtroom, explaining he could not pay his fine because his wife was sick. Keanu said, "When I saw you forgive him, when I saw the way you spoke to him with gentleness, I thought of my own life, of the people I've lost. I thought of how important love is. You reminded me that no rule, no fine, no system should ever stand in the way of love." His voice cracked slightly as he said it, showing the depth of his sincerity. The audience grew silent, holding on to every word. Judge Caprio reached out and gently touched Keanu's hand. "I only tried to do what was right," he said softly. "If people saw kindness in me, it's because kindness is what I believe in." Keanu smiled and nodded. "And that's why you've touched us all," he replied. "In a world where we're often told to be tough, to hide our feelings, you showed us that mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strength." The studio filled with clapping again. Some people in the audience were wiping their eyes. The connection between the two men was strong. It wasn't about fame or power, it was about values. It was about one man recognizing another for the way he had lived his life. The host finally stepped in, giving the audience a moment to breathe. He asked Keanu why he felt so strongly about meeting Judge Caprio. Keanu answered simply, "Because we live in a world that forgets kindness too easily." "But you," he said, turning to the judge, "you made kindness unforgettable." Judge Caprio laughed softly, trying to lighten the mood. "You're making me sound better than I am," he said. But Keanu shook his head. "No," he replied firmly. "I'm only telling the truth. It was not a performance, it was not a speech prepared by publicists. It was one human being speaking from the heart to another. That honesty filled the room with warmth. Everyone watching knew they were witnessing something special, something rare. As the applause finally settled, Judge Caprio leaned back, his hands folded. He looked thoughtful. He said quietly, "All my life, I just wanted to remind people that everyone has a story. Even if they broke the law, even if they made mistakes, they are still human, and if we listen, if we give them a chance, we can help them instead of breaking them. That was my mission." Keanu nodded. "And you succeeded," he said firmly. "More than you know." The two men shared a long look, one filled with mutual respect. The audience could feel it, the weight of gratitude, the bond of shared belief. This was not about entertainment anymore. It was about legacy. It was about the power of words, actions, and choices. By the end of that moment, everyone in the studio knew they had witnessed the heart of the farewell. It wasn't just about saying goodbye to a judge. It was about honoring a life built on compassion. And through Keanu Reeves' heartfelt words, the entire world now understood how far that compassion had traveled, reaching even the quiet corners of people's lives. Judge Frank Caprio sat quietly after Keanu Reeves finished speaking. The weight of those words was heavy in his heart. For a moment he could not even respond. He had always believed his role was small. Just a local judge in a small courtroom, yet here he was, being honored on national television by one of the most respected actors in the world. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from emotion. The crowd could see the tears forming in his eyes. Finally, he lifted his head and spoke. His voice was soft but steady. "Thank you, Keanu. But I must tell you something. The truth is, I never saw myself as a hero. I only saw myself as a servant to the people." The audience clapped gently. Appreciating his humility, he continued, "When people came to my courtroom, they weren't strangers to me, they were neighbors. Fathers, mothers, children, all trying their best to survive. How could I not treat them with compassion?" Keanu nodded, smiling as the judge spoke. The host gave the two men space to share their feelings. Judge Caprio took a deep breath and then said something that made the entire studio quiet. "You see, the credit does not belong to me alone. It belongs to the people who stood in front of me. They showed courage when they shared their stories. They reminded me every day that behind every case is a human heart." The audience was silent. Listening carefully, Judge Caprio's words carried a wisdom that touched everyone. He explained how every person who came into his courtroom taught him something. Some taught him about patience, some about struggle, some about resilience. He said that he never wanted to break anyone's spirit. Instead, he wanted to lift them up. Then he looked at Keanu and said with a gentle smile, "If I ever did something good, it's because I listened. I didn't create kindness. I only returned it." The audience clapped again, and Keanu bowed his head in respect. Judge Caprio went on to speak about the philosophy he carried. "Law is important, of course, without rules. Society cannot stand, but rules without compassion are empty. They can destroy instead of heal. I wanted to show that justice is not just about punishment. It is about balance, about remembering that every life has value." As he spoke, the cameras showed the audience members wiping tears from their eyes. They were not listening to a speech from a judge. They were hearing the life lessons of a man who had lived with integrity and love. Keanu leaned closer and said softly, "That's why people love you. You didn't just follow the law. You followed your heart." Judge Caprio chuckled warmly. "Sometimes people thought I was too soft. But I believe mercy has its own power." The host asked the judge how he felt about retirement. The question hung in the air for a moment. Judge Caprio's smile faded slightly. He sighed and said, "It is not easy. This courtroom has been my life. It has been my way to serve. To leave it behind feels like leaving a part of myself. But I know it is time." His voice cracked a little, and the audience felt the weight of his words. Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You may leave the bench," he said gently, "but you will never leave the hearts of the people." The judge smiled at him, touched by the comfort in those words. Judge Caprio then turned to the audience. "If I can leave one message for you," he said, "it is this. Kindness is never wasted. When you show compassion, it may seem small, but it can change someone's life. Sometimes even a smile or a forgiving word can be remembered forever." The studio was silent, every ear and every heart listening. The judge was not just saying goodbye, he was passing on wisdom. He wanted people to remember that kindness was not weakness. It was strength. The host gave him space to finish, and Judge Caprio continued, "Many people thanked me for what I did, but they don't know how much they gave me in return. Their courage, their honesty, their struggles. They gave me strength too. They reminded me every day to be humble, to never forget my own roots." Keanu smiled at those words. He knew exactly what the judge meant. They were both men who carried humility as a shield, who found meaning not in fame but in sincerity. The audience then gave Judge Caprio a standing ovation. The sound of clapping filled the room. Some shouted, "We love you, Judge!" Others simply cried. The judge waved gently, almost embarrassed by the attention. But deep inside, he was grateful. As the applause died down, Keanu said softly, "This is your farewell, but it is not an ending. Your legacy will live on. Not just in videos, not just in stories, but in the way people treat each other after hearing your words." Judge Caprio looked at him and replied, "If that is true, then I can retire with peace in my heart." The moment was heavy with emotion. It was a farewell full of grace. A man who had given kindness his entire life was now receiving it back. Not in fines forgiven, not in courtroom moments, but in the love of the people who admired him. And beside him sat Keanu Reeves, a man who understood exactly what that meant. In that studio, the world was reminded of a simple truth. Kindness does not end with retirement. It does not fade with age. It continues to ripple outward, touching lives in ways we cannot always see. Judge Caprio's farewell was not just the end of a career. It was a reminder of what one life filled with compassion could mean to the world. The air inside the studio grew heavy with emotion. Judge Frank Caprio had just shared his heart with everyone, and Keanu Reeves had poured out his respect in return. The audience could feel the weight of the evening. This was not only about retirement. It was about two men standing together as symbols of compassion and humanity. The farewell moment had finally come, and everyone knew it would be unforgettable. The host paused for a while to let the silence breathe. Then he said softly, "Judge Caprio, tonight is about you. It is your farewell, and before we close this evening, there is something more." At that moment, the screens behind the stage lit up, playing a montage of Judge Caprio's most memorable moments. The audience gasped as they saw clips of him forgiving struggling parents, laughing with children, comforting elderly men and women, and speaking words that had inspired millions online. The judge watched quietly, his eyes watering as the clips rolled. He shook his head slowly and whispered, "Oh my goodness." He had not expected such a tribute. The videos showed him not as a stern man of the law, but as a grandfatherly figure who treated everyone like family. Each clip was a reminder of the humanity he brought into the courtroom. As the montage ended, the audience rose in applause. This time, it was not just polite clapping, it was deep, loud, emotional. People shouted his name. They shouted, "Thank you, Judge, and we love you." Judge Caprio stood up, waving gently, tears streaming down his face. For a man who had always stayed humble, it was almost too much, but it was beautiful. Keanu Reeves stood up beside him, clapping with the audience. Then he stepped closer. He looked at the judge and said in his quiet but powerful voice, "On behalf of everyone here and millions who have watched you, thank you. This is not just a goodbye. It is a celebration of the good you have given the world." Judge Caprio turned to him. Still overwhelmed, he said softly, "Keanu, I never imagined this. I never imagined my life would touch people so far away. I only wanted to do what was right." His voice cracked as he spoke. The audience went silent, listening carefully. Keanu then did something unexpected. He bent down on one knee before Judge Caprio. The audience gasped for a moment. It looked as though the roles had reversed, the Hollywood star showing respect to the humble judge. Keanu held the judge's hand and said, "You showed us what true justice looks like. Tonight we honor you not as a judge, but as a man who made the world softer. Thank you for teaching us." The audience erupted again into applause. Some clapped, some cried, some even shouted words of gratitude. Judge Caprio's eyes filled with tears as he gently lifted Keanu up and embraced him again. It was a long, heartfelt embrace, not forced, not for the cameras, but real. The kind of hug shared between two people who understood each other's hearts. As they sat down again, the host handed Judge Caprio a small plaque. It was inscribed with the words, "To Judge Frank Caprio, for reminding the world that justice without compassion is incomplete." The judge held it in his hands. His fingers tracing the letters, he whispered, This means so much. The atmosphere in the studio felt electric yet tender. Everyone knew they were not watching an ordinary farewell. They were witnessing a moment that would stay in their memory forever. The audience began to chant softly, "Thank you, Judge, thank you. Judge!" And the chant grew louder until the entire room was filled with it. Judge Caprio tried to speak, but emotion caught his throat. Finally, he managed, "All I can say is thank you. Thank you for letting me serve. Thank you for letting me be a part of your lives. I will never forget this." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Keanu placed his hand again on the judge's shoulder and whispered something the microphone did not catch. But the smile on Judge Caprio's face showed it was something kind. The bond between them felt strong, almost as if they had known each other for years instead of meeting for the first time that night. As the farewell drew to a close, the host invited the audience to stand one last time. Together, everyone clapped in rhythm, filling the studio with sound. The lights dimmed slightly, and the camera focused on Judge Caprio and Keanu sitting side by side. Both smiling through tears, it was not a staged ending. It was raw, real, and human. The goodbye was not about speeches or grand ceremonies. It was about respect. It was about one man recognizing another, and about an audience recognizing the gift of kindness they had received over the years. Judge Caprio's farewell was not the end of his influence. It was the beginning of his legacy living in the hearts of everyone who had seen him. The emotional goodbye became the soul of the evening. People in the studio hugged one another. Strangers felt connected. Many whispered to themselves that they would carry Judge Caprio's lesson into their own lives. They would try to be a little kinder, a little gentler, a little more forgiving, and that was the best farewell any man could ever hope for. As the cameras prepared to close, Judge Caprio and Keanu shared one last embrace. The audience rose again in applause, the lights softened, and the final image on the screen was of two men, not famous titles, not careers, but two human beings joined by kindness. The emotional goodbye was complete, yet it felt like a new beginning for everyone watching. When the cameras turned off and the bright studio lights slowly dimmed, the feeling in the room did not disappear. People stood silently for a while, still clapping, still wiping their eyes. It was as if no one wanted the night to end. Judge Frank Caprio sat back in his chair. Holding the small plaque in his hands, his heart was full. He had entered the show thinking it was just a farewell, but he was leaving with something much greater. He had been reminded that his life's work had touched countless hearts, far beyond what he had ever imagined. Keanu Reeves stayed by his side. The two men spoke quietly while the audience calmed down. Keanu told him, "Judge, tonight was about you, but what you've given the world will not stop here." Judge Caprio smiled softly and replied, "Kindness never really ends, it continues to travel, even when we are gone." His words carried a deep truth, one that echoed in the minds of everyone who had been watching. As Judge Caprio stood up to leave the stage, many people from the audience rushed forward just to shake his hand or say thank you. Some hugged him. Others simply smiled at him with tears in their eyes. One young woman said, "Judge, you inspired me to study law, but more importantly, you inspired me to care." An older man whispered, "I watched your videos when I was losing faith in people, and you helped me believe again." Judge Caprio listened to each one with the same patience he always showed in his courtroom, gently nodding, smiling, and thanking them for Keanu. The evening was also unforgettable. He had come to honor a man he admired, but he left feeling that he had received something too. He had seen firsthand the love and respect people had for Judge Caprio, and it reminded him once again that true greatness is measured not by fame or money, but by the lives you touch. As he walked with the judge backstage, he thought to himself, "This is the kind of story the world needs more of." The legacy of that night quickly spread. Clips of Keanu Reeves embracing Judge Caprio were shared everywhere. Millions of people watched online, writing comments about how deeply moved they were. Some said it made them cry. Others said it inspired them to treat people better in their daily lives. Teachers showed the clips to their students. Parents showed them to their children. People in offices and homes all over the world stopped for a moment to talk about kindness. Judge Caprio himself did not see the night as his own glory. In the days after the farewell, he said in an interview, "I only hope that when people remember me, they remember kindness, not me as a person, but the message of compassion I tried to live by." His humility once again shined through. He never wanted to be seen as larger than life. He wanted to be remembered as someone who simply cared. For many, The farewell became a turning point. People who had been cynical about the world found hope again. They saw that even in a courtroom, a place usually filled with fear and rules, there could be mercy and humanity. They saw that even someone as famous as Keanu Reeves valued kindness above fame. The combination of these two men on stage left a powerful impression. It showed that no matter where you come from, Hollywood or a small courthouse, what truly connects us is compassion. The story of that night will live on not just as entertainment, but as an example. It will be remembered as the evening when a judge said goodbye but also passed on a torch. He reminded people that kindness should not end with him. It should continue through everyone who witnessed his journey. Keanu's words and presence made sure that the message reached far and wide, touching corners of the world the judge himself could never travel to. In the end, Judge Caprio's legacy was not about fines forgiven or cases closed. It was about lives lifted, spirits healed, and dignity restored. His farewell was more than an ending. It was a reminder that every act of compassion, no matter how small, carries forward. It ripples into the world, inspiring others to be gentle, to listen, to forgive. As he walked out of the studio with Keanu beside him, Judge Caprio looked tired but peaceful. He had given his best. And now the world was giving back love. Keanu placed an arm around his shoulder and said, "You didn't just change lives in Providence, Judge. You changed lives everywhere." The judge smiled and replied quietly, "That is enough for me." The night became a memory for everyone who was there. But more importantly, it became a story that people would tell again and again. Parents would say to their children, "Do you remember that kind judge?" Teachers would say to their students, "Look at what compassion can do." Strangers would share the video and say, "This is the kind of world we need." And so the farewell did not feel like goodbye. It felt like the beginning of something new. The legacy of Judge Frank Caprio lived on in the hearts of millions, carried by the words of Keanu Reeves, carried by the applause of the audience, carried by every tear shed that night. It lived on because kindness once shared never truly ends.